Well, we're back again with another one of these audiocasts. For those of you who did not watch the other one, the Sly Cooper audiocast, practically all of you did though, so wow. But in the event that somebody didn't, these videos are mostly my perspective, my experience with these games. They're not really they're not meant to be a review, they're not meant to be like an ad to play them, they're not meant to be like this professionalized gameplay footage, professionally edited thing. No. You're probably just going to be looking at this the entire time. You're going to be looking at this. Occasionally my little hands are waved through, but this is all you get. So basically, that's what I call an audiocast. I'm just talking, man. I'm just going to be talking about this stuff and my personal experience to this. Because as far as I'm concerned, I can't review this game. I couldn't review the other game. Why? Plenty of other people did it far better than I ever could. So if you're looking for a review on the game, then don't come here. But if you're looking for maybe a perspective of a player who just plays video games, then maybe you might like this. Maybe. I don't know. We're going to be talking about all three of these games here. It's been a bit longer since I played them, since in contrast to the Sly Cooper games. The Sly Cooper games, I had just recently completed through those, so I had a lot more of a freshened perspective on how a lot of this stuff went down. For this, I'm going to be going primarily off of memory. It's been about a year, maybe 3, maybe 4, I don't know. But we're going to get started about the first one right here. The first one, Jack and Daxter, they dropped Daxter the next two, as you noticed. But the first one was Jack and Daxter. These were created by the creators of Crash Bandicoot, Naughty Dog. If you haven't realized, I believe that's their logo right there. They decided that they wanted to move away from the marsupial in the PS2 eras, so they created a new mascot for the PlayStation 2. Enter the elf-looking character and his quirky, outspoken ocelot-based friend Daxter. Otzel, not Ocelot, Otzel, they call him an Otzel. This was your typical collectathon game, and probably one of the things I liked the best about this is that there were very few, if any, loading screens in this game. Everything was open. It was an open world map with no loading screens. You could go from your little hub area into all the other little areas. You're running up to the next area, you're not going to go through a loading screen. You're just running through a pretty empty pathway, which kind of might act like a loading screen, so to speak. But you're still able to play the game, you're still able to smack things, you're still able to bonk things on the head until you get to the next area. And they did that for every single area, practically. From one hub area to the next hub area, there was no loading screens. There might have been like a vehicle segment or something to get to the next area, but overall, it was loading screen free. There was a few areas. There was a few that you had to go through loading screen to get to. I believe one of them was the island, the other island far away. But overall, it was loading screen free. You had the standard little spin attack like Crash had. You had your typical jump ability, and I believe that was it. You were able to use these special little mana abilities depending upon which color you pick up. I forget the term for it, but you got the blue one that makes you run fast. You gotta keep picking up those little blue ones to be able to open a door or something to give it an electrical charge. There was, I believe, a red one, which allowed you to bonk things harder. There was, the yellow one, which allowed you to fire attacks with the little key blast type things, which was your only method of long-range attacking, when in certain areas they would always give you that ability if you needed to use it. I liked how balanced this game was, in terms of, like, difficulty and, level of play. Anybody could get into it, anybody could enjoy it. It was one of the easier ones to, like, 100%, so to speak. You didn't need to use any cheat codes, you didn't need to use any guides. Maybe you might, but overall you could figure everything out yourself and max it out. It was your typical collectathon. You picked up the little berries, which were your kind of like currency. You would use those to buy power cells from the NPCs, or it was just the focus of a quest of some sort. Overall, it was a simple, fun game. I have no problems with it. It wasn't really the focus of this Rant Files video. No. The focus of this Rant Files video was its sequel, Jak 2. Oh yes, the infamous Jak 2. The one that everyone says is probably the best of the trilogy, but also the hardest of the trilogy. It was also the one that had the largest tonal change to the gameplay. Away with was the light-hearted open-world perspective of Jak and Daxter, and now we have the dark, edgy, teen-angst era of Jak 2. You had a little bit of a time skip, because, you know, you wanted to do away with the child-looking Jak here, and you entered the little teen with the little stubble beard, Jak in Jak 2. The little Audiocast buddy is still there. He's still there. He still makes his little quips. He might have a little playable segment or two in there as well. But overall, he was fine. Some people say he's annoying. I didn't find him annoying. He was just funny at times. He was fine. He was fine. The gameplay is one part running around, run and gun, because I guess they probably found out that Ratchet and Clank was a lot of fun, because they had all those guns and stuff like that, and they thought, ooh, maybe we should do that too. So they started adding a lot more firearms and weapons and guns that Jak could use to shoot people with. And I think this was around the time that Grand Theft Auto 3 had dropped, and it was also huge, and everybody was loving it, and everybody was playing it, so they thought, ooh, let's do that as well with our little cars and bikes and things of that nature, and give it a little bit of hub city for people to run around it, and nothing but go from A to B, and maybe bump into things and all that stuff, and it was fun, it was serviceable. I liked the city, but it felt a little bit too much like they were trying to be something else. They were trying too hard to do something different, that they lost the soul of what Jak and Daxter represented. Away with was the light-hearted, friendly platformer, and now we've got the edgy game. And that's fine, I don't mind the edgy game. It's serviceable, and the story was certainly quite fun. Jak talked in this. I actually didn't have a problem with the talking protagonists. I never have a problem with talking protagonists, because I like stories. I don't like knowing what the protagonist is thinking half the time. So if you don't have one of those, then it loses its serviceability, so to speak. At least to me, I think that. Because if everybody else is talking and you're not talking, then obviously I'm going to think something's wrong with you. Oh, you're just the silent protagonist. Oh, he's not going to speak, but everybody's talking to him. You know, so as you can see, I like talking protagonists in video games. I like when people talk to you. It's rude not to talk back, you know? At least give me like a little response choice to pick at you, things like that, you know? But let's do away with that. We spent a minute and a half on that type of rant. That's not really even the focus of this rant files. The focus was 3 missions in particular. Three, as you can see, 3. I'm holding 3 fingers up. There were 3 missions in this game that really pissed me off. If you watched my Sly Cooper audiocast, you'll know how I really dislike when they make a sort of like a side quest mini-game. I dislike when they make a mini-game mandatory. I understand it being mandatory to 100% your file, but mandatory to, like, proceed to the next story area, proceed to the next mission, proceed to the next, to beat the story, to get to the end credits, and things of that nature. Because completionists, they wouldn't care about all those side stuff, but they would play to the end credits. Regular gamers would play to the end credits. The completionists would do all the side stuff to get the 100 file, and people who like the game would do the other stuff to get the 100 file, but a lot of people just play to the credits, right? So, when you're in here and you play to the racing tournament, there are technically two. There's a third. There's actually the third, technically. It's a one-on-one race. But there are 2 races that are mandatory. And I sucked at them. I will fully admit that I sucked at them. And, you had to get first place. Otherwise, you had to keep playing. You had to keep doing it. You had to keep running and running and running and running and running and running. And if you kept failing and failing and failing and failing and failing and failing and failing, you would never progress to the next mission. Because you might be the best shooter this side of the Mississippi, but if you aren't a racer, if you're not good at racing, you can't continue. So, you either got good at racing in a game you weren't expecting to have racing in, or just take out the game, just put it away and don't bother with it. I'm being overdramatic for the sake of entertainment, and it's probably not entertaining you in the slightest. I understand that. The focus of this argument, though, is that I despise when a gameplay segment that is largely different from the main gameplay elements in 90% of the game, and you make this new gameplay segment, this mini-game type of segment, mandatory to do. It's just not. Obviously, you don't dedicate as much time to doing it, so it's not really as refined as the rest of the gameplay elements, and it just ends up being a wonky little thing. The racing segment here was a very wonky thing. Other people might have loved this section. Other people might have loved it. The little critics who would review this and say, oh, we love the races. That's fine. If you like the races, that's fine. If you like to do it, it's fine. I think the point I'm trying to make is that a minigame should be a side thing, optional. These races should have been optional. They shouldn't have been mandatory. Like, I get that it's, like, supposed to be this thing that you had to do for the story, you had to take part in the tournament, but why do you have to get first place? Why not second or third place? You can get first place in the side races. You can get first place in the side races and win your crap there. Why do we have to get first place in the mandatory mission? Why not make it to just finish the race? Just finish the race. That's the plot. That's the plot story. Finish the race, and then we'll go into the next segment. Everybody could do that. Everybody can finish a race. Not everybody can get first place. So to somebody who absolutely abhors racing games, to somebody who absolutely abhors races, who openly admits that they absolutely friggin' suck at racing, to somebody like that, they're gonna get stumped. They're gonna get stuck. They're not gonna be able to continue. So, I was a bit naughty. You see, I looked up on the wiki that there was something the developers left in their code for all 3 games. In fact, for the PlayStation 3 version, it was still there. What is this little thing that they left in? It wasn't necessarily a cheat code so much as a code that you put in to activate debug mode. Like textures and things of that nature. So it might be a cheat code. It was a code after all. But you were able to put in a code to access mission select. You can access your mission select. You could access flight mode, basically allow yourself to like fly anywhere on the map, so you could skip platforming segments if they were something that you couldn't do. I didn't really do that part, but I did abuse the mission select. I went into the mission select section of debug mode, and I selected the mission that comes right after the race. I basically just skipped it. The game thought that I beat the race, so that's cool, but I didn't do the race. I skipped it. I love debug mode. All developers should leave debug mode in their games, in my opinion. Because if a player gets to a segment that they honestly hate, it's a mini-game segment, it's not part of the core gameplay of everything else. None of that platforming, running gun shooter stuff that Jak was all about in Jak 2. It was just a race, and you said, I don't want to do this race. I really don't want to do it. Skip it. Just skip it and go to the part you want to do. Go to the part of the game you want to do. And that's what I did. I skipped the race and went to the next mission. I played up until the second race, and then I activated debug mode again, and I skipped the second race. To be fair, I tried to do the second race. I gave it about 10 tries, and I was always coming in second and third place, never first place. Always second and third, sometimes fourth, most of the time fifth. But I just couldn't do it, so I skipped the second race, and I went to the next mission. And played until we got to the third race. The third race is basically like this one-on-one mission where you're like chasing some guy. You gotta pass him to get to the end point. And you're playing on the main map of the city and things of that nature. And I was like, I'm not too keen on that either. I don't really want to do that either. So I skipped it. I skipped all 3 races. That's the only thing I did. It's the only thing in debug mode that I did. I skipped the races. I skipped them. I said, I don't want to do this. I don't like this gameplay style. I want to get back to the platform. I want to get back to the main core gameplay. I don't want to do a race. So I skipped it. And I played everything else. And I enjoyed it. Except for the races. And I think they got the message. Because by the time Jak 3 comes around, the races, if there were any, I don't remember there being many. Since there's only one that you kind of had to do as some sort of buggy type race in the deserts. But outside of that, there was nothing. There was no mandatory race that you had to do. That was it. No races. No more races. That was great. It was great in the third game. That they implemented that idea that the races were now side stuff. You could go talk to an NPC and say, hey, you want to do this in the race? Okay, go ahead, do that. But you didn't have to do it to get to the end credits, to get to the next story segment. You had to in the second one. You had to. There were three of them. And, luckily there's a debug mode for me to skip those missions. Skip the races and go to the very next mission. And just do all of those instead. I will admit I was a little bit naughty in the third one as well. Because you see, there is an infamously annoying mission in Jak 3 involving a turret. I didn't want to do it. So I skipped it. I love debug mode, man. Some of these people, I know a lot of you might disagree on using things like debug mode and cheats and things like that. And I know a lot of people in some other communities would say, oh, you should just get good at the game. But to me personally, my personal outlook on video games is fun. F-U-N. Fun. If you're not having fun, then what are you doing? You're just getting upset. You're just getting frustrated. Is that fun? Is that fun? It's not fun to me. I'm not having fun. So I'll do something to the game. I'll modify it so that I can have fun. So that I can have fun again. So I wasn't having fun of the race. I skipped it. I was having fun again. I wasn't having fun of this stupid turret mission. I skipped it. I was having fun again. So that's what I did. I skipped the things I didn't like. Technically 4 things total. 3 races and 1 very annoying turret mission in Jak 3. We'll get started on Jak 3 in a minute. But, so overall, with Jak 2, we had a gameplay style change that ultimately was fine. It was serviceable. In fact, it made it stand out a little bit from Jak 1. But Jak 1 was already standing out because compared to Ratchet and Clank, which was coming out around the same time, it was focusing more on using the guns. So actually, by comparison, Jak 1 was actually the original one. Compared to like the big 3, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank 1, and Jak 1, in Sly Cooper, you had the hub world, and then you had loading screens to go to the next little levels. It was very linear. It's kind of like how the Crash games on the PS1 were set up. And then you had Ratchet 1, which is set up like going from world to world to world to level to level to level, kind of like how Spyro was. But you were using Ratchet and mostly his guns that you can pick up, his weapons, the bombs, and things of that nature. You had the little wrench too, but overall, you were using a variety of weapons. And then you had Jak 1, which was just the spin move, the little bonking attack, and then using the eco magic stuff occasionally for certain platforming elements. It was a platformer at heart. Sly 1 was a platformer at heart. Ratchet and Clank was more action-based. But I guess out of the 3, Ratchet and Clank, I think, performed better. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to look it up later. But it might have. It must have. Because when Jak 2 comes out, here we have Jak using guns and all that stuff, just like Ratchet was. Just like Ratchet was. So I suppose, in a way, Sly Cooper 2 was keeping it more in core line to platforming than Jak 2 did. So I might have to give Sly 2 a little bit more credit. And I do, I honestly do. It was the most balanced in the form of the trilogy. This one was a stark contrast to the first one. You still had the little spinning move. You still had that. They kept it, but you rarely ever used it. You mostly used the guns. You only used the little spinning move when you ran out of guns. You're just mostly using the little ammo with the guns, the weapons, the shotgun, the firearm, the rifle, the machine gun. I think they had a missile launcher one. I think they had a little missile one. But I think it was just the standard, like, pistol fire shot, shotgun fire shot, like a little machine gun type of rifle. You could upgrade them, they could do better damage, things of that nature, but that was mostly what it was. It was serviceable, I suppose. There was a fair amount of timed platforming segments that you could use debug mode to skip if you were so inclined. I tried not to do it, except on things I really, really hated, like the races. But if you wanted to, you could use debug mode to skip those. You just activate flight mode, fly through the little platforming segment while the little timer's going down, then land at the end of the platforming segment and run out the door. Boom! It's over. You don't have to worry about your little timed segment. And I know a lot of people hate being rushed. And time limits in games, for me, I just absolutely hate them. I absolutely hate them. I understand and I feel your pain. I hate time limits, man. I hate them. It makes me feel rushed, and I hate being rushed. So Jak 2 is the primary focal course of this Rant Files audiocast. When we go into Jak 3, however, I think this one is my favorite of the three. Like, I like the setting of Jak 2 far more, but Jak 3 just took everything good about Jak 2 and scrapped everything bad about Jak 2 and added a lot of more good things to Jak 3, which is awesome. In Jak 3, you start out in the desert. Plot things happen, and you're now in the desert because reasons. You get picked up by this little desert clan, and you get to rise up through the ranks, become accepted, and then you get your own little vehicle to navigate the deserts and do all sorts of desert shenanigans. There's a lot of buggies. There's different types of buggies. One is for speed, to go super fast. One is, I really like this one. One of these buggies is this type of platforming buggy. It has these little spring loader type tires on the back where you flatten them and it jumps you in the air. And you had to use that in sort of like desert vehicle based platforming. And I know, this is why people who talk about these games use video footage, because you're probably not knowing a single thing of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about these buggies. But that's why I expect you to have played these games. I expected you to have played these games to know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, see, I expected it. But if you haven't played these games, I recommend that you watch reviews on these games to know the type of platforming that I'm talking about. I recommend you watch those. There's quite a few people out there who've made reviews on them. I'm not going to name them. Just go into the YouTube search bar, type in X title, review, boom. And you'll find out what I'm talking about. But for this one, we had the little jumping vehicle buggy, desert buggy, and we used that to navigate desert platforming vehicular style. And that was cool. That was really cool. We did return to the city of Jak 2. It's quite different from what it used to look like. It's actually pretty decrepit now. But we return, and we do some stuff there. The story is kind of on the same level as Jak 2. They're like two parts of the same whole. But in terms of gameplay, I like to think that Jak 3 is far superior because it realized that those races being mandatory really killed it, really killed the game. So they thought, let's make them optional. Let's make it optional. So they made it optional. The little desert buggy races, if there were any, they were optional. So that's cool. You kept it primarily the core gameplay of riding the buggies out in the desert, riding the little bikes in the city, and core run and gun platformer. The gameplay, gun style, the gunplay, the combat, whatever, it's the same as Jak 2. It's the same. They didn't really change too many things. They might have added a weapon, they might have added a skill, they might have added something to make it interesting, but it's overall the exact same as Jak 2. In terms of combat, in terms of platforming, things of that nature. But the thing that they changed greatly with vehicles, the buggies in the desert areas were very fun to use. They were very fun now. There's not too much else I could say. My core rant files was on Jak 2. Overall, in terms of consistency, 2 and 3 are very similar, but they're in stark contrast to the first one. If we compare that to Sly 2, we have a very linear type of platformer. We branch out a little bit, but still got plenty of depth to all three characters. The gameplay style is mostly the same for Sly, and it was pretty balanced overall. Then we got the third one where they tried to do too much, too fast. There's too much, and there's very little substance, and we just wished we had a little bit more with the stuff that had very little substance. Some things got improved, like Bentley's playable character in this, but overall, it was very shallow. In this one, we have a very strong first entry, a very strong, innovative, if you don't know what innovative means, To innovate is to invent, to make things. So, when I say an innovative first entry, I mean it's a very creative one. No loading screens. That was like a pretty rare thing to have at the time. That was awesome. Gameplay was very fun. It was very lighthearted in terms of story. The story was very light, but you didn't need a strong story for these types of platformers. You don't need one. It just needs to be fun, and it was. It was great. There were some vehicle segments that were kind of annoying, but you got the hang of it. You got the hang of it, and you got it. Then they had a stark contrast in the gameplay. You had guns, you got to drive vehicles, you had a little GTA-style city with mission-based stuff, and they just completely turned it into Jak 2 Grand Theft Auto for babies. But it's not really for babies. It's pretty much just the same type of combat. You're just not using actual guns like the firearms and all that stuff. You're using techy, futuristic, fantasy guns. There's still guns. You got the pistol, you got the shotgun, you got the rifle. Same thing. So you got the Grand Theft Auto style Jak 2. A lot deeper story. Very serious. Serious-er compared to the first one. But overall pretty serviceable, but it suffers from what the Sly Cooper games did, where they made mini-game type segments mandatory instead of optional. And that's what really killed it for me. It made those little races mandatory. If it wasn't for debug mode, I probably would not have finished this game. I would have stopped at the first race and just moved on to Jak 3 and watched a little movie version on YouTube of Jak 2. Because I'll die on this hill. I don't like racing. I don't like it. I'm not the best at it. I completely suck. I will accept that I suck at racing. I will always get second, third, fourth, last place. I can learn the track all I like, but there's always going to be somebody better than me. Always. Even the AI is better than me. So, it might even just depend the wonky racing mechanics. I can complain all I want. I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to say I sucked. I sucked at the racing, so I used debug mode and skipped it. In the third one, I didn't use debug mode except for turret mission. Time. I think it was time. I hated it, though. I just hated it. I hated it. It was a little turret mission where you had to do some stuff, and it sucked. Just like in Sly 2, there was this final segment where you had to use a turret, and that sucked too. It might have been for the same reasons as I hated this one, but if you can't imagine, I hate turret missions, I guess. But outside of that turret mission, the rest of the game was really fun. The story was fine. I'm not going to spoil the story. The gameplay was fine. It was fine. There's no forced minigame segments except for maybe one. Outside of that turret mission, there was this one thing where you're in some sort of like precursor type area. This little fancy high-tech area. Tube. You had to go through this little tube in a vehicle, and you had to navigate through all these little treacherous little objects. I think you only had to do it once or twice. I was able to do it after a lot of retries. I almost skipped this too, but if I could complain more, I could always gripe more about that. There's this little tube area that you had to go into the little vehicle, and you had to navigate through all that stuff to get to the end. And once you got to the end, that was it. You had to do it once or twice. I think twice. It's been a couple of years. But for the most part, it was good old desert buggy driving and just standard platforming with Jak, with the run and gun style that they adopted from Jak 2. If I have to go with consistency, 2 and 3 are very consistent. They're very consistent. 3 feels like a sequel, a good sequel to the second one. It feels like it justifies itself. The second one, in contrast to the first one, it feels like 2 very different genres. They changed a lot of things. And while there's a lot to like about Jak 2, there's also a lot to like about Jak 1. And it's just this own bubble of sunshine amidst an array of angst that is 2 and 3. If I had to say which trilogy I liked more, I would have to say that I like the Sly Cooper trilogy more. But if I had to go through, like, each game and say which game is superior, I would have to say, I'm trying to pull this other, here we go. If I had to compare here, Sly 1 to Jak 1, I would say Jak 1's superior. It's the superior game. This one's too linear, this one's too many loading screens. It's very fun, the story's fine, but this one just had that innovative loading screen free feeling to it. If I had to compare Sly 2 to Jak 2, I would say that Sly 2 is the superior game. Sly 2 had varied gameplay elements, it had good hub world stuff, it had some mini-games still. It still had the mini-games, it suffered from that, but Jak 2 suffered from it as well. It's just that you were able to get around it a little bit more in this one than you could have in this one. This one you needed to use debug mode. Now, granted, Sly Trilogy, this one they didn't have debug mode in these games for the PlayStation 3 release. I'm not sure if they had them on a previous release, but in this one, they had a debug mode for all 3 games. It's all in there. If it wasn't for debug mode, I wouldn't have been able to beat this game. So, I actually didn't beat this one either. You know, I stopped the final boss just to watch the ending. But for the most part, I'd say that this one is a very serviceable game. This one tried to change things up too much. This one feels like a strong sequel to the first one. They tried to do a lot of things different, but they tried to keep a lot of things the same. This one changed too much. It changed too much. It's still fun, but it feels like a completely different game to me. If I had to compare Sly 3 to Jak 3, I'd say I prefer Jak 3. Jak 3 is very fun. Very fun. Very, very fun. Now, I said I preferred the Sly Cooper trilogy to this, even though I prefer 2 games over these 2. So how does that work? Well, in an overall viewpoint, which one did I have more fun with? I would say I had more fun with this than I did with this. I just played this. I had the most fun with the buggies in this and just everything in that one. I had the most fun on the first game because personal preference-wise, I like that lighthearted, just platformer-esque feeling to it. And that's what the first one did. And these 3 kept that aesthetic throughout all 3 games. Even though they tried to do too many things different, they still kept that consistency in terms of this is a platformer game first, over, like, this is an action shooter type of vehicular-based game. So while this still had some of that in there, in the form of minigames and things like that, that didn't become part of the identity of this. Because vehicular type of missions was part of Jak's identity. It was. And it changed the core identity of what the first one was. Which is why I say I prefer the Sly Cooper trilogy to the Jak and Daxter trilogy. This has been a longer audiocast than the previous one. I ended up going into another platformer trilogy, the Ratchet and Clank trilogy, and I also brought back up the Sly Cooper trilogy, so that might have added to the runtime a bit. This is almost 40 minutes of me talking. This is definitely an audiocast. I am not going to reshoot this. There's some things in this video I didn't like, but I'm not going to reshoot it. I'm not going to waste another 40 minutes. I don't want you to waste another 40 minutes listening to it either. But hey, if you wanted to watch this all the way through, if you listened, don't watch, listen to this. Don't just sit here and stare at this for 40 minutes, okay? Just listen. Go do something else, but listen. listen to the video. It's an audiocast. If you enjoyed this, I might start doing more of these in the future, and if you can tell, my third one is probably going to be the Ratchet and Clank trilogy. It's probably going to be that one. I hope you enjoyed this, and remember, if you liked it, like the video, click the like button. You'll have to log in. You'll have to log in. I know that sucks, especially if you're like on a mobile phone and things like that. And you're not logged in. You're on incognito mode or something like that. You'll have to log in, write in your little username, password, whatever. But if you're already logged in, why not like the video? Why not click subscribe? Why not make a little comment? It all helps. It all helps. Thanks for watching, and remember, be imaginative.